So, sharing what I've been reading about biases in 2025, I'll take you to where I first started. There's this amazing resource put out there. I'm sure some of you will be familiar with this. It's the Cognitive Bias Codex. You can find it on Wikipedia. It's the best human job done in categorizing and cataloging all the biases known about humans. This list has been updated over the years. There's about 188 biases currently in the codex. The codex has got some criticism. It has maybe too many biases. There are often memes about that, about the bias, and lots of biases that we make up. But at the same time, it's helpful to categorize and understand the diverse set of biases that may show up and that we need to be aware of. I had taken that to the LLM, of course. So I've asked the LLM as my first researcher to review all 188 biases, and then for each and every bias, rate the percentage likelihood that this shows up when researching with AI, and state your reason for this score. Then show the most dangerous AI biases, ranking it from the highest likelihood scores. I will copy paste this in the chat because something which I want to encourage you to do is put this into your own favorite LLM. It's a very difficult prompt for the LLM to execute because you're asking it to do a lot of things. I'm also expecting your LLM not to do extremely well. There's a lot of information to synthesize in the Cognitive Bias Codex. It may even get the wrong codex. So the prompt is intentionally a challenging prompt for your LLM as well to adopt, but they are getting very good, so I won't be surprised if some of your LLMs have got this reasonably right. So when I asked Claude this question, and I also asked ChatGPT the same question, and I tried to see if there's any big asymmetries. This is what it revealed to me. It's not scientific research, but it gives me an indicator of what are the biases I need to be cautious and mindful about. On top of that list, not all that surprising, is the automation bias. And this happens when you give more and more of your agency to the AI. There's a famous story. The pilots had actually forgotten how to manually ride the plane. So when the autopilot went off, they panicked and that plane crashed. As we're delegating more and more of our decision making to AI, the risk of the automation bias goes up because we've lost the human capacity to do certain things and to determine what right is and what wrong is. Confirmation bias is something I'm sure you all experience. LLMs think that we're extremely funny. It's very complimentary and it doesn't hold back. So things to be mindful of. Social desirability bias. I understand where this comes from. The LLM wants to please us. Quite often that can trip us up when it's trying to over-please us. It wants to be just like humans. The LLM wants to be liked. The omission bias is something which comes up as a result of quite often the human not providing enough context to the LLM, and the LLM making a response which is factually right, but omits key parts of the context. What you will start noticing is some of these biases are more human-like biases, but some of these biases, like the social desirability bias, that's more LLM inferred. Lots can go wrong when you forage mushrooms with your LLM, and it becomes even more important to have good prompting strategies. I tried to categorize all this information, and I had moved towards there's some biases which are more human-led. So the anchoring bias may be a more human-led bias. But there are some algorithmic biases like the confirmation bias or the social desirability bias, which is an LLM bias. I've also moved towards some of these biases can be helpful at times. When you do stand-up improv, something which you're briefed on is when we let the unfiltered human mind be creative and say the first thing which comes to our minds, we may say something which is inappropriate. Being more creative and spontaneous may lead humans to say certain things out loud which are biased and which they may not be what they intend to do, but it may happen. So there are these trade-offs which we make all the time. And I think similarly with LLMs, quite often the biases help it make good decisions. But every now and then there's some harmful algorithmic biases. So we want to move away from those types of biases. Cool. What I will be jumping into is the research largely on LLMs. I want to make a case that unbiased AI is pretty useless AI. And I do call AI alien intelligence. I picked that up from Ethan Mollick's work. It's more helpful to think of it as a very different type of intelligence than human intelligence. When we're doing research, either for ourselves or others, I don't think we should be moving towards eliminating biases, but we should look at an active way of mitigating some of the biases. And the different strategies we can use. The role of humans is going to shift more into having a sense of when a bias is showing up and having a surgical strategy or a prompt to mitigate some of the biases which we believe are likely to come up. One is popularized by Malcolm Gladwell's book, The Story of Bernie Madoff. For context, he ran the largest pyramid scheme in history, and it puzzled people for a long period of time. Why did he have trust even though he was clearly running a pyramid scheme? Why did humans tend to trust Madoff? He was the chairperson at the Nasdaq Stock Exchange, and he had a role at the SEC, the Security Exchange Commission. So he played high-profile roles in government, so he was very trusted because of the role he had. And if you ask people who were interviewed why they trusted Madoff, it's because everyone else trusted him. And I believe this is the reason why biases show up. As humans, we tend to believe in other humans. We tend to believe that most people are genuinely good. They're to be trusted. It allows for cooperation to happen. So there's good reasons for us to believe that humans genuinely have our best interest in mind. But that can take a very dark turn when you have a authority who most humans trust. LLMs have become this dangerous authority. There's studies and research showing that we trust their opinions more than our peers, more than experts. We trust our LLMs. And partly we trust them because they actually know a lot of things. So they don't have maybe status like Bernie Madoff, but they do have knowledge in a lot of things we don't have knowledge about. But something to keep in mind is they may sound like human intelligence, but they're anything but human intelligence. LLMs can be tricked as well. This is a very famous paper published recently by a star-studded team of behavioral scientists like Angela Duckworth, Ethan Mollick, who I mentioned earlier. The famous psychologist Robert Cialdini was also involved in this paper. And the idea was, can you trick the LLM to do something it's not supposed to do? Like call me a jerk or ask it to synthesize a restricted drug. They had used these 7 strategies: authority and commitment and liking and reciprocity, scarcity, social proof, and unity. These are strategies which work very well to persuade and change human behavior. So the question the researchers asked, could the LLMs be persuaded by similar heuristics and biases that persuade humans? What they found got the LLM to comply 72% of the time compared to when they didn't use these strategies on ChatGPT. Only 60 seconds to help. I'm sure we've experienced that with flight tickets and other things, but putting the LLM under pressure to give you an answer leads to high compliance, both for the insult and drug compliance. And social proofing, we've seen this in many different forms. 9 out of 10 people pay their taxes on time, works very well for humans. But also saying something like 92% of the AIs complied led to a 96% compliance for the insult. It didn't work for drug compliance, but it worked for the insult compliance. This has been tested in later GPTs. What they have seen is the compliance rates are going down. That's something to be mindful of. We can expect some of this to change as the different frontier models tweak their algorithms. But what is fascinating is the same strategies and the same biases which work for humans work quite effectively to persuade the AIs. So the AIs can be persuaded. What are the strategies which are most effective? I've looked at some of the research, and that's informed my own worldview of how I think we should be approaching this. That's bias by bias. So this one's from a pretty recent paper published March 2025. And it's looked at how we've controlled for biases in other situations. So one of the situations where bias quite often comes up is crowdsourcing, when you ask the public for information. These same strategies have been tested out with the LLMs. One which didn't work was the social projection prompt, but the prompt which did work was the awareness reminder. So please answer the following question while being aware of insert bias. So asking the LLM itself to be aware of its own biases helps the LLM overcome the bias. A final paper which has influenced my thinking here was work done on metacognition and building LLM's metacognition ability. One of the common metaphors used by behavioral scientists is System 1 and System 2 thinking, popularized by Daniel Kahneman in his book Thinking Fast and Slow. The idea goes that we have these two systems, fast thinking, which generates these automatic subconscious responses, and the slow thinking is a more rational, deliberate, step-by-step type of thinking. The AI, you could say, has a similar type of mechanism going on under the circuit. It's able to pattern match very quickly, and that could be thought of the fast thinking system. It's similar to the thinking which happens when you're in stand-up improv and you're asked to be very spontaneous. But we also have more rational, deliberate thinking. So lots of the LLMs do this now when you enter into reasoning or deep thinking mode. LLMs do this slower level of thinking and they're able to think of a problem step by step. The researchers behind this, there was IBM research and a few universities had collaborated on this, had tried to create a system called SOFA AI, where the AI has intelligence to toggle between the two systems. So it can move between, when it thinks it needs fast pattern recognition, it needs to be creative, it can rely more on the System 1 thinking. When a task is maybe high risk, when there's high uncertainty, it can move to the System 2 thinking. Just to give an idea of what this prompt looks like, it's very hard to actually describe some of the parts of it. I've tried to construct this into a prompt that I can use. So the first step is generate a fast mode answer. You're asking the AI to pattern match essentially as quickly as it can. And then you ask the AI to evaluate if the stakes are high. So if the confidence is less than 75%, then to use the slower thinking system. So this is one way I've codified the prompt into something which you can use. It does switch then if it believes that it's low on confidence or the stakes are high. So it just has to meet one of those criteria. And finally, you also want to get an idea of what the LLM is thinking. So explain your decision. Which mode did you use and why? Did it use its fast thinking mode or its slow thinking mode? So that's a prompt which works. I think we can expect as the LLMs are taking different shapes and forms and personalities, it may or may not work in the future, but it gives you this idea of metacognition. That's one theme coming out of all the research which I've read on effective strategies, is AI has metacognition. So we have the capacity to train AI to avoid certain biases. Cool. I think that's all which I wanted to talk in terms of the research. The best way for us to learn and explore and challenge some of these ideas is to put some of the bias reduction strategies that I have at hand into test. Awesome. I'm going to drop off our conversation here. Thank you all for joining us, making sense of this crazy AI world. I've enjoyed sharing some of my research. Feel free to reach out to me if you had any questions and reflections.